Oh hey, I'm not dead. Well, there's probably at least a few of you that are happy to see that I didn't scrap this thing. It's been pretty busy, I've been pretty burnt out between my regular day job of working on cars to come home and do this on the weekend and such. But I finally got up enough motivation to actually make a video about it. Believe it or not, I was actually doing some work on it off camera. A lot of it was brainstorming the clutch setup. My initial plan didn't at all work out. I tried it a few different ways, and the original plan I had of the belt lever clutch setup didn't work because it's kind of hard to get to work with two belts. I tried using a belt tensioner like from an F-150. I got different clutch cables and stuff. I made some stuff up, but it's kind of hard to put even tension on two belts next to each other. It kept wanting to kick the belts off and go sideways, and it was like way too much tension or too little, and the belts were acting they were going to fly off the pulleys and everything. So I decided to just simplify it, and I'm hoping it'll work. But I put a belt drive CVT on this, like you would have like on a go-kart, something like that. I know I'm probably well over the weight limit for it, but I'm kind of hoping that the gearing and the transmission will kind of make up for it. But I'll show you what I came up with. So yeah, some stuff has actually happened. The engine's actually mounted. Nothing really changed with that, except I had to actually raise it up a little bit. So I put on more of the 2x4 steel I had under it, or 1x4 it actually is, to space the engine up a little higher because it was going to hit the rack and pinion, the large pulley on the CVT. This is just some Amazon CVT. I know I could have probably gotten a good one, but I figured this will kind of be proof of concept. I didn't want to blow like $400 or $500 on a nice CVT and not have the idea work at all. So at least now I have kind of if this works, it'll be proof of concept. I can put a better one on it if this one smokes itself. But you'll see I had to do some notching here. That was more just so you could get the belt on it, because I had to pull this pulley off to get the belt on it, so I had have enough angle to get it out there, so I had to butcher the transmission a bit. And then there's just a chain going from in there down to the initial shaft I made. You can't really see, but nothing really changed with that. So it just goes there, back down. I did actually gear it down a little bit just for trial and error. I think it goes from a 16 tooth to an 18 tooth, if I remember right. It's been a little while. But I've actually started the engine, revved this up, put it in gear and such, and it actually works. I'll demonstrate that hopefully in this video. But right now I don't want to carbon monoxide myself out. The other thing I did was I made a battery box or battery tray for a lawnmower battery right here. So that's secure. I made up battery cables. I took the key switch box that was on the side of the engine here, and I lengthened all the wires and actually ran them into the car. And then so that I can still remove the engine, I used some just connectors here from AutoZone, so I can actually unplug everything and just plug it back in real quick without having to undo a few wires like that. So the engine can come out relatively quick. And surprisingly, that all works. Here's the switch in the car. I very crudely mounted it. I don't know if the battery's gonna work or not. Nope. Oh, there it goes. There you go. Battery's not dead, so that actually works. So I can turn the engine on and off from in the car. So actually, the last thing that's left for me to test drive this, at least in version 1, and see how much doesn't work, is the brakes. You'll see there's a new master cylinder on it. Originally, the car had power brakes. There's a booster right there. Because I assume the engine would not drive enough vacuum or not pull enough vacuum out of it for the power brakes to work, and I'm trying to make the thing as light as possible, I took the booster and the factory master off. The reason I didn't use the factory master cylinder was because the reservoir was smashed off of it. And although I could find a master cylinder, I couldn't really find the reservoir. Maybe there's something somewhere on the internet, but I looked for a little while and I couldn't find a reservoir, at least what mine looked like. So I randomly went on eBay and I just searched for manual master cylinder to try and find one for manual brakes. I wanted one that had the integrated rod in the back of it. And a few pages in, I found this one, which for some reason is off a 1978 Ford Fiesta. I don't know why I got that of all master cylinders, but I did. And it was on like clearance from some parts house on eBay, but obviously. So it was only like 20 something bucks. And it actually works pretty good. I already cut the factory Yugo brake lines here that had this wacky plastic coating on them. I used a torch to burn that off and then put new ends on them here to match up to everything. So that's the front channel and this is the rear. I have it capped off here. I'm hoping that this just tees, but we'll find out. But what I have to do, because this is just kind of hanging in midair, is attach this to the factory standoff here. This is where the power booster went. The only thing is that the rod in the master cylinder is slightly shorter than the rod in the back of the booster. So yeah, there's a rod like this coming out of the back of the master. So it won't reach the pedal. So I'm going to cut this tube here shorter and then weld this plate right to it, and hopefully that will be the correct length for everything and the brakes will work. Then I can try bleeding them and have everything in the hydraulic system fail and fix all that. So this is probably a little bit easier for me to show you off the car. This is what I was talking about with the master cylinder. Some master cylinders for manual brakes actually have the rod that goes to the pedal built into them. It's not guaranteed, but some do. Now you won't have that with a power brake master cylinder because you have this booster in between. This is a vacuum booster. Some are vacuum, some aren't. But the rod goes on this instead, and then the original master cylinder goes out here and gets actuated through the booster. So the issue is that these measure two different lengths, if you can see that, from like the flange of where they sit until the brake pedal. So currently this will not reach the brake pedal. I measured these. This one is 5 5/8 from the mounting flange to the center of the pin here that goes through the brake pedal assembly. And this one is about 4 7/8. So I have to take off a little bit under an inch. I'm thinking right, 7/8 of an inch. I'll screw this up real good. Off that tube that comes off of the firewall to space it out. And then I already made a flange here with some captive bolts, which I can weld onto that tube, and then Fiesta master cylinder will bolt onto that. So that's the game plan. Okay, so here's the situation with the brakes. Like here's the one off the Yugo power brake booster, and here's this one. So yeah, it's like a hole, but it might not really go in the pedal that good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just going to cut that flange off of there, and I'm gonna weld the Yugo one onto there. Now I was gonna be super fancy, and I was trying to actually drill this out and then slide it over that tube and like weld it, put a hole in it and weld it again so it wouldn't come off. But then right at the last second, the drill bit broke off in it. And now I just have a hardened drill bit in there that's eating up every other drill bit I try and run into it. So that's what I get for trying to do it right. So now I'm just gonna hack it. Well, I almost had success. I already flared the lines to the correct fittings before you saw me install it, so that's why the lines worked. I cut off the Yugo fittings, they were just pure rust, and I just like burnt this plastic coating off these hoses, or the lines here, and flared them and put new fittings in that matched this master cylinder. So when I went to go bleed it, I was using my contraption I made here years ago for that rabbit I had. That just clamps on there, and then the zip tie holds the blowgun open, and then the hose goes to the little Harbor Freight compressor that I have regulated down to like 10 pounds. I just pressurize that and I bleed the wheels. Well, this was the only wheel that bled. The other wheels didn't flow any fluid to them. By process elimination of cracking the lines, going back, all the hoses are shot. And I tried cleaning this one out first, and it actually did kind of work. And then I went to go pump the pedal and the line blew off there at the top. So this is on hold for a little bit until I order some hoses. And just to be safe, I ordered wheel cylinders for the back. I may order calipers for the front, but they were, I don't think Rock Auto had any of them, so I'll have to try and find them somewhere in case I need them. So let me order some parts and then we'll be back on this again and see if that actually worked. Okay, it's a few months later, but I did get the parts for this. I got all the brake hoses and such, and I put the brake hose on this side because this was the first culprit, and I wanted to see how it bled. And it did bleed, it didn't leak, but both the front calipers froze up and wouldn't move. So they basically expanded, wouldn't contract, and locked the front brakes on like full blast. And I don't know if I mentioned in the earlier half of the video, but brake calipers for this are like unobtainable. I've had some wacky cars before, and usually if you just dig on the internet long enough, you eventually find the parts, and no one has calipers for this. I found one on a few sites. They all had like the right or the left, I forgot which one it was, and it was like $100-something, which is almost what I paid for the car. So I'm not going to do that. I did check out the rear. The rear seems okay. It's probably all original. I mean, I don't think this car was driven that much. I'm going to put new hoses on this because these hoses are also collapsed, not allowing any fluid through. But, so what I had to do was I had to get caliper rebuild kits. So I already did the one as like an experiment. So if you can tell, that one's rebuilt. But this is what we're going with here. I even tried putting a C-clamp on this and you can't even press it back in, which is how this one was too. You can't get the piston out with any method, the compressed air or anything. It's pretty well frozen. What I did was I actually threw a complex series of the wrong brass fittings threading into the brake line port. I pumped a grease gun into this one and pressed the piston out. And then I sanded the bores and cleaned all the rust off, and it was all good. The bodies are aluminum, and then this is steel, the actual piston. So I've never actually rebuilt brake calipers before because it's kind of a waste of time, because normally brake calipers are pretty cheap. I don't know, if you're going to spend an hour doing something, or you can get a new one for like 20 or 30 bucks, it's not really worth doing. But in this case, I don't have much of a choice. So I'll show you what I did. Hopefully it'll work on this one, or else, well, I don't know, we're going to have to throw an anchor out of this thing or something to stop it. So like I said, I just kind of cross-threaded a bunch of the wrong brass fittings into here. And it worked on the other one, so we'll see if it works on this one too. There it goes. One piston, one caliper with a giant mess of grease in it. finally got the whole brake situation sorted out here, I think. Calipers are rebuilt. They're not leaking somehow. The new hoses are on. Fun fact, the front and the rear hoses look exactly the same, but the fronts are slightly longer. Guess how I know that. Anyway, the brakes seem to kind of work now. The rears are meh, but they're not leaking, and it has a pedal. Mass cylinder's holding. Also, one of these lines, for some reason, one of those lines, had a pinhole in it. So that was fun to figure out while I'm trying to bleed the brakes by myself, why I keep getting air to the rear. But brakes are functional. So I guess it's about time to see if this was a giant waste of time, effort, and money or not, and see if it actually moves. So somehow this thing actually, I guess, kind of worked. You might have heard in the video, so I have to just throw it in the gear and just grind and hope it works. That's because now with this CVT, everything's always spinning. That's why I didn't originally want to use this. I wanted to use that belt clutch setup so I'd actually be able to disengage things. So instead, I guess the trans gear is just going to take the swap out when they hit each other. But it actually does kind of work. It needs the idle lower, and I think it's all the way down, so that's not really good. And it doesn't really want to run without, like, it has to be completely warmed up, or else the second you even put it in a gear, the drag on just the CVT kills the engine. Once it warms up, it seems to be better. So, I don't know, maybe I had to put an aftermarket carb on or something, because this factory carburetor seems to be kind of finicky. Maybe that's why someone returned this motor back, like a year ago. But whatever, it passed its first test. I guess the next video, you'll see this thing out on the public streets, and you'll probably see it get impounded and crushed into a cube.